The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, we bring you an interview with the leader of the opposition in the Eastern European country of Belarus and focus on her fight for democracy. Up first, what does Donald Trump's second term mean for the Middle East? That's next on the agenda. As Donald Trump prepares to return to the White House, he does so with a war raging in the Middle East, notwithstanding the ceasefire reached between Israel and Lebanon. In addition, the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which may complicate matters even more. Let's delve into all of this with, in Tel Aviv, Israel, Einat Wilf, former member of the Israeli Knesset, that country's parliament, and co-author of The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. In Chicago, Illinois, Khalid El-Gindi, senior fellow and director of the Program on Palestine and Palestinian-Israeli Affairs at the Middle East Institute. He's the author of Blind Spot, America and the Palestinians from Balfour to Trump. And here in our studio, John Allen. He's former Canadian ambassador to Israel and senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. John, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming in. And to our friends in Points Beyond, thank you for joining us on TVO tonight. I want to start with I guess just to get a gauge of where the three of you are on this question. Do we have any reason to believe that Donald Trump's approach to this region of the world in his next term will be any different than it was during his last term? Einat Wilf, why don't you start us out on that?
It's tough to know. We can gauge through the nominations and the declarations. Certainly the nominations on issues facing Israel, so the ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, the ambassador to the United Nations, which is obsessed with Israel, so Elise Stefanik, and the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, are all strong pro-Israel supporters. So hopefully this sends a message that this is going to be the direction of his administration. He's also made it clear that he wants to pursue peace. He definitely feels that after ending his previous term with 4 peace and normalization agreements and momentum for more, he feels that the momentum was stopped by the policies of the Biden administration, and he's clearly eager to renew that momentum.
Khalid El-Gindi, how do you see it?
Well, Donald Trump is notoriously unpredictable, but there's not a whole lot of mystery given that we have the record of the first administration and based on the appointments. I think we're not just talking about a pro-Israel orientation. We're talking about the most far-right extremist, even messianic ideological views coming into this administration. People who openly say that there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There is no such thing as an occupation. You have noted well-known Islamophobes and other bigots entering this administration. So it is I think, an understatement to simply call it pro-Israel. It is aligned with the most extreme messianic elements of the Israeli government, which of course is also quite extreme. These are people who believe that God is in control of events, and there is no need for things like diplomacy or they're in a realm of the other world and not normal politics. So I think it's an extremely dangerous administration that is shaping up, particularly when you combine it with a far-right extremist Israeli government that believes, some of whom believe in expelling Palestinians and in annexing the West Bank. It's a different ballgame, I think, Trump 2 than Trump 1.
John Allen, how do you see it?
Well, I think I agree with both in a way. I think what we have to see is whether or not the people that Trump has appointed have any real power, or what is really going to happen is that Donald Trump is going to decide what he wants to do. Clearly, if Mike Huckabee had his way, there would be no two-state solution, and the West Bank would be annexed tomorrow, and I don't think that's going to happen. I certainly hope it doesn't happen. And we do know that Donald Trump wants to make deals. He tried to make the deal of the century with respect to Israel-Palestine last time. It wasn't much of a deal for the Palestinians. And he may well try that again, putting pressure on Palestine to come to the table. We'll see. There's also the possibility of a Saudi-Israel-U.S. deal. That deal, the last time it was being negotiated pre-October 7 did not have much or anything for the Palestinians, but the Saudis have now changed the game, and they are demanding sometimes a path forward to the two-state solution, sometimes a Palestinian state, depending on when they've been speaking lately. So,
well, let me stop you there, because there's so many good points that everybody's made so far that I need to follow up on. Let me start with the ambassador to Israel that Donald Trump has just appointed, and that's Mike Huckabee, since his name came up. And Einat Wolf, let me get you to start on this. He is an evangelical Christian. He does believe, as Khalid said, that the end times can only happen and the Messiah can only return when all the Jews return to Israel, which will bring about the revelations as described in the New Testament. And I wonder if that gives you pause at all for the possibilities in the region.
First of all, there tends to be a general misunderstanding of evangelicals in the U.S. The tiny minority are what you described as millenarians. The vast majority simply believe that if you bless Israel and the Jewish people, you will be blessed. Also, they tend to be people who belong to the view that they read directly the Old Testament, so they have a clear understanding, which is constantly being denied by our enemies, of the historical, cultural, ritual, uninterrupted connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel. There's no doubt that he believes in annexation, and all I can say as someone who herself does not support annexation is that last time that we even had the threat of annexation, what we got was 4 peace and normalization agreements. So given the vast imbalance in numbers, 7 million Jews surrounded by 500 million Arabs, which despite positive developments in the Gulf are still by and large devoted to what Ambassador Abba Eban called policide, the non-existence of the Jewish state, supported by 2 billion Muslims who largely are of that view. It's not too bad to have about 100 million evangelicals who support a president who basically will therefore perhaps force the Arab and Islamic world to contend with the idea that Israel is not a temporary aberration in the region and that they finally have to bring to an end their century-long war against the existence of a Jewish state and any borders.
Khalid, as you look at Team Trump, Mike Huckabee in Israel, Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, Elise Stefanik as the new United Nations ambassador, what emerges from that list as far as your characterization of the possibilities in the region?
Yeah, I think the common thread running through all of them is an intense hostility toward all things Palestinian, across the spectrum, ranging from anything and everything that Palestinians do is illegitimate. Palestinian politics are illegitimate. Palestinian aspirations are illegitimate. On one hand, like Marco Rubio, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, Mike Huckabee and Pete Hegseth, the designated defense secretary, who simply don't believe in a Palestinian people and believe that God orders events in the Middle East, and therefore, what sort of diplomacy could be allowed. But it's clear the one thing they all have in common is an intense hostility toward Palestinians, and that's the problem here. It isn't Israel's place in the region. Israel is a nuclear power. It's the most powerful force militarily in the region. It has wreaked havoc on Lebanon, destroyed the entirety of the Gaza Strip, killed tens of thousands of people. Everyone in the Arab and Muslim world understand that Israel exists because they live with the consequences of Israel's existence in terms of the atrocities that we've seen, particularly in the
let me
last
just jump in there for
14
a
months.
second. Let me jump in. They may understand that Israel exists, but obviously there are significant factions in the Middle East that don't acknowledge
Sure.
that Israel exists. That's fair to say, isn't it?
It's true. Most countries don't recognize Israel formally, and that has to do almost exclusively with Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Israel was created at the expense of the Palestinian people. The expulsion or flight of Palestinians, 2/3 of the Arab population of Palestine in 1948, the occupation of the remaining parts of Palestine in 1967. So the core issue has always been the Palestinians and their rights. And Israel has, as it's moved more and more to the extreme right, has become even more intransigent and unwilling to accommodate even the most basic Palestinian rights. Never mind the right of self-determination. The right simply to live on their own land is not something that this extremist government is willing to accept.
All right,
That's
let me get
not
John in here.
necessarily the case of previous Israeli governments who were willing to accommodate Palestinian political aspirations.
Yes. Let me get John in here in as much as I'd like you to comment on the team that Trump has got on this file, if you like.
Sure.
From this standpoint, and I don't want to exaggerate this, but, you know, there is that expression, only Nixon could go to China. Is it possible that Trump has picked a very pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian group that at the end of the day could surprise us by maybe ushering in something we don't anticipate in a positive way?
Well, I'm going to go back to what I said originally. That group is not going to surprise you. That group is pro-Israel, either anti-Palestinian or anti-two-state, or maybe not quite completely, but they're very, very pro-Israel. So it's not going to be up to that group to bring peace to the Middle East. It'll be up to Donald Trump himself. I want to go back, though, to what Einat had to say, because there are two other numbers that are important. 7.5 million Jews in the region and 7.5 million Palestinians in the region. And no peace and security is going to happen until there is a separation of those two. And
hang on, John, hang on. 7.5 million Palestinians?
7.5 million Arabs.
Okay,
in the
depends how
region.
you want to count.
20% are in Israel.
Okay, depends how you want to count, though, right? I mean, 7.5 million Jews, but depending on how far afield you want to look,
well, yes, that's what I want to
could be
address.
hundreds of millions of Arabs, right?
It could be, but what the Arabs have said and what the Saudis have said since the 90s with their Arab Peace Initiative is that if Israel is prepared to recognize a Palestinian state, all of those Arab states will recognize Israel. The deal has been on the table for a long time. There are complications to the deal, refugees, Jerusalem, etc. But those complications have existed. So all of those Arab states, which Einat mentioned, and there's no question there are problems, and we're not talking about the Iranians, we're talking about the Arabs, the deal is on the table. And if Israel wants to move towards that and move towards a state, then those countries will recognize Israel. And that can help deal with this problem of hatred, etc.
Einat, you've heard a lot there. I want to give you a chance to respond.
It's exactly the reverse. The only issue has ever been the complete and total Arab and Islamic rejection of the equal right of the Jewish people as a people to self-determination in their historic homeland. The Jewish people, deeply cognizant of their status as a minute, ethnic, national, religious, and linguistic minority in an overwhelming Arab and Muslim Middle East. I mean, the 7th century conquests of North Africa and Levant were successful, so good for them. Cognizant of our status as a minority, have always agreed, going back to the existence to the creation of Transjordan, to a two-state solution as long as one of the two is the Jewish state. And the Arabs have always rejected a two-state solution if one of the two is a Jewish state. The Arab Peace Initiative is also no such initiative. It demands, it's a take it or leave it demand that all Arab countries agree to, which should already give you a clue, demanding Israel go back to the 1949 ceasefire lines. Plus, it demands this idea of refugee return, which has only ever meant the way to undo the idea of a Jewish state. There has never been an Arab peace initiative that recognizes the idea of a Jewish state, that makes it clear to the Palestine Arabs that they are not refugees when they live in the West Bank and Gaza, and that they possess no imaginary or invented right of return into the sovereign state of Israel. And therefore, every time, even with different Israeli governments, when Palestinians were faced with the choice, you can have your own state in the land, going back to 1937, but the Jews will also have their own state. They could never accept the Jews as their equals, as sovereign, and that has only ever been at the core of the conflict.
All right, Khalid, let me bring you to more present-day developments, and that is the attempt by the International Criminal Court to have a role in what's going on here. They issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. They issued arrest warrants for, how would I describe this? I'm not sure what the point was, since some of the arrest warrants they issued were for leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah who are thought to be dead now as a result of developments there in the last few weeks. Tell me what you think the practical effect of the ICC putting out these arrest warrants is.
Well, the development itself, the issuing of arrest warrants for Israeli leaders or any Israelis is unprecedented. There has never been any meaningful attempt at accountability for Israel's very long history of atrocities, going back to even 1948, but all through the many wars in 1982, the Second Intifada, we've seen many such cases. So it's unprecedented in that sense, that Israel has never been held to account, particularly given the special relationship with the United States, which has always deflected any sort of accountability, responsibility for Israel's actions. And I think it's a very important precedent. Of course, Netanyahu, neither Netanyahu nor Gallant are going to be show up at The Hague anytime soon. But it does have impact in the sense that all signatories to the Rome Statute, including all nations of the European Union, are obligated to enforce these arrest warrants. And many European countries have said that they would abide by the arrest warrants, including the UK and others. Others have said that they would not.
Let me pick up on that. Yeah, I'm going to pick up on that with John, because Canada's Prime Minister is one of those who has been on record in saying we are one of the original signatories to the creation of the International Criminal Court. We believe in the rule of law. He didn't say it specifically that if Benjamin Netanyahu comes here, we'll arrest him and take him to The Hague. So that's what I want to ask you. Can you imagine a scenario, and the Israeli Prime Minister does come to Canada from time to time, can you imagine a scenario where he shows up at Pearson Airport and the RCMP arrest him and take him to The Hague?
I can't imagine a scenario where Benjamin Netanyahu will travel to any country that is a signatory to the ICC statute and which is obligated to arrest him. He just won't go there.
Well, that's a long list.
It's a very long list.
That's 124 countries.
3 countries so far have said they would not abide. One is the United States, which is not a party. Mm-hmm. The other is Hungary. And the third is Argentina. Those are the only 3 countries that have suggested he could visit without being arrested. That may change. I don't know. But yes, the Prime Minister said he would follow the rules of the ICC. The obligation is to arrest if he comes.
Einat, I want to ask you, and I guess we should preface this question by saying when you were a member of the Knesset, you and Mr. Netanyahu were not in the same party. In fact, I suspect you have a pretty different view from him on a lot of what goes on in Israel. But tell us, practically speaking, is the Israeli prime minister a prisoner in his own country right now?
I don't know that in terms of the practicalities. I know that more countries have recently started to say that they will not implement it. The Czech Republic, France just issued it. Also, there have been some rumblings for the court that if Israel has some commission, then they will withdraw it. So perhaps actually realizing that they have overreached, because legal scholars have made it clear that first, it has no jurisdiction. The claims that were based were actually proven to be false. So this politicization actually in many ways could be endangering the court itself. But Netanyahu is known to be, should we say, a person who does not take risks. And it's likely that he will not take those risks until he could be assured that he will travel and not be arrested.
Okay, let me now turn to the possibilities. And again, we remember when Trump had his first term that he did surprise a lot of people by managing to get signed the so-called Abraham Accords, which included deals between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Bahrain. And of course, until October 7th of last year, John, there was a great deal of conversation about the possibility of getting Saudi Arabia to sign on next. How do you see the prospects of that happening in Trump 2?
Yeah, let me just say that you've got four countries there, UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, who did recognize Israel. And you've got the Palestinians who also have recognized the state of Israel. So,
which Palestinians?
The PA, the Palestinian Authority, which is the government in control in Palestine.
But not Hamas and not Hezbollah.
No,
PLO.
absolutely not. Mm-hmm. And the PLO.
Right.
Do I see I can certainly see Donald Trump trying for a deal. There's absolutely no question about it. Donald has said that Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize and he wants it. So he is going to do everything he can to make some big deals. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to make a deal with Iran. But on the Saudi, Israel, U.S. side, yes, I think he will want to. But as I said before, the Saudis have now said that's conditional on movement on a Palestinian state. So whether or not Donald decides he wants to incorporate that it's worth it for him to push for a Palestinian state, he may well be able to get the deal of the century.
Khalid, what do you think the chances are for a Saudi-Israeli-American agreement?
I don't think the chances are very high. I mean, it's something clearly that was a priority for both the Biden administration and Donald Trump. The Saudis are the big prize in the Arab world, and it would effectively mean the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. But the Saudis have made clear that they're not going to move on normalization with Israel until there's movement toward Palestinian statehood. And Palestinian statehood is the death knell of Netanyahu's coalition. That's the one thing that could bring down this coalition, that and ending the Gaza war. And so I don't see any scenario in which Prime Minister Netanyahu would ever agree to even a rump state-like entity like what was proposed in his first term, because that would torpedo his coalition. And the Saudis have made clear that they're not going to accept anything less. So I don't see that happening without intensive U.S. pressure. And I don't see U.S. pressure on this Israeli government coming. We haven't seen it from Biden, and I don't see it coming from Donald Trump either.
And not everybody agrees that Saudi Arabia would be the big prize for Israel. But I wonder from you whether you take them at their word that there will be no agreement until there's progress made on the Palestinian issue.
I have to say that this is actually the easiest thing Israel has, and I think even someone like Netanyahu can do that. All that Israel has to do is actually make it clear that there is a path to a Palestinian state, the only one that has ever been. The day that Palestinians end their century-long war against Zionism, the day that they develop a constructive vision of wanting to live next to a Jewish state, rather than devoting their capabilities to trying to prevent it and then to undo it. The day that they understand that they are not multiple generation refugees when they live in the West Bank and Gaza, and that they do not possess an imaginary right of return. That day they will discover, as has been the case for the last century, that the Jews have never been the problem. We've always agreed to a two-state solution, provided one of the two is the Jewish state, which means that even the PA, unfortunately, never recognized the idea of the right, the equal right. I'm not greedy, not exclusive, not superior, the equal right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their historic homeland, which means no return and no perpetual refugeehood. I repeat that because those are the two most effective litmus tests to know whether there is true reconciliation with the idea of a sovereign Jewish state. So when you say people recognize Israel, I commend them for recognizing reality, but actually there are none who recognize the equal right, or not say none, maybe the UAE, the equal right of the Jewish people as a people and a nation to self-determination in their historic homeland. So the problem is not pressuring Israel. The Jews have always said yes, provided the one non-negotiable is that we have a Jewish state.
Khaled, as we look at the other side of the coin, and let's talk about pressure, do you think it's possible that Saudi Arabia could use its influence with Donald Trump to pressure him to be more even-handed and less pro-Israel in the region?
Yeah, but I think it's important to just respond to what Einat said, because there's a lot of imaginary history and complete disregard for massive, I mean, just the whole history of international law is completely thrown out. Refugees do not have imaginary rights. They're rights enshrined in international law, and they're recognized universally everywhere except Israel. In terms of the point about Israel always ready to accept a two-state solution, all you have to do is go back to last July, when the Knesset overwhelmingly, the unanimous rejection by all Israeli Jewish Zionist parties of a two-state solution. So it's not really who's not kind of reality based, because this was just a few months ago. As far as Saudi Arabia, yes, the Saudis are the main source of leverage here in terms of trying to convince either the Israeli leadership or the Trump administration of any kind of movement toward Palestinian statehood. So it really comes down to how badly does Donald Trump want it? Does he want it bad enough that he would be willing to put pressure on Israel's far-right government in a way that would actually bring down that government? So, this is existential for Netanyahu in the sense that his personal and political survival depends on keeping his coalition together. That's how he avoids going to jail. And the only way to do that is to give his far-right extremist coalition partners everything they want in Gaza, everything they want in the West Bank. And he's done that. And I don't see that changing.
John, it's interesting. Yeah. We have two leaders here, both in Netanyahu and Trump, who need to win and stay in power to avoid going to jail. It's a very odd moment in world history. Having said that, do you think the Saudis can use their offices in this case to influence Trump to be less pro-Israeli in the hopes of moving towards a better outcome?
Well, let me just say that Donald Trump's got 4 years in the White House. Bibi Netanyahu has to go to elections in 2026.
That's still a long time from now.
It is too long in my view, but the polls suggest that he will not be reelected. That could change. We know that. But if he is not reelected, and if somebody like Naftali Bennett becomes the prime minister with a more moderate coalition, you might find somebody in the Israeli parliament and a leader of Israel who is much more interested in having a deal with the Saudis and in thinking about moving towards a Palestinian state. We will have been 2 or 3 years past October 7, which is time needed to heal the wounds on both sides, and you will have a more pragmatic government. We've seen the Bennett government before, and they were pragmatic, and then maybe we'll see an opportunity for the Saudis and Donald and Bennett and company to move towards a better future.
Einat, do you see a better future if Netanyahu is not prime minister and somebody else is?
Regardless of who's prime minister, the one non-negotiable that the Jewish people have in the state of Israel is that we want to be sovereign in our own state, in our own homeland. You will never find a government, and you actually had Israeli governments, Barak, Olmert, who offered Palestinians a state only to be rebuffed and have it followed up with violence. Even with Trump, I remind you that it is Netanyahu himself who said yes to Palestinian state as part of the Trump peace plan, and it is the Palestinian leader who said, true to their century-long battle, no, no, and 1,000 times no. So the issue is not one singular leader. The issue is what the people want. And unfortunately, it's always been this. The Jews wanted a state. That is the one non-negotiable. They're willing to have it a small state. They said yes to partition. They said yes to multiple plans from 1937 to 47 to 67 to 2000 to 2008 to the Trump peace plan. They've said yes to two-state solutions. And the Arabs, and especially the Palestinians, are yet to say yes to any plan that will let a Jewish state live. So if anyone truly wants peace, the only obstacle has ever been the Arab and especially Palestinian rejection of the Jewish right to self-determination. Solve that and you solve the conflict.
Khalid, can I get you to speak to that?
Yeah, that's it's completely ahistorical, has no resemblance to the reality on the ground. The absence of peace comes from the fact that the denial of Palestinian rights, and in the case of the current Israeli government, the denial of their very existence. Palestinians, 5 million Palestinians live under Israeli rule with no rights at all. And in Gaza, they don't even have the right to live. They don't have the right to go to school because most of the schools have been destroyed. All of Gaza's hospitals have been attacked. All of its universities have been destroyed. This is an existential war for Palestinians, not to have a free state, but simply to live and survive as human beings. So what is at the core of this conflict is the systematic denial, dispossession, and subjugation of an entire people. It's why the international human rights community unanimously, virtually, has described the reality that exists in the West Bank and Gaza as apartheid. And that's why Israel is facing a genocide case in the International Court of Justice, and why Israeli leaders have arrest warrants, because what is at the core of this conflict is the violence perpetrated and the subjugation and denial of Palestinian rights. That is the center of this conflict. And when that ends, then there can be peace and perhaps reconciliation.
John, I'm down to my last minute here, and I want to put this to you. This is a part of the world that never fails to break your heart. Every time it seems there is a glimmer of hope, those hopes are dashed. So I want to ask you about the glimmer of hope that we may have seen earlier this week, namely the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, which the Biden administration apparently looks as if it has got nailed down. You want to read a lot into that or a little into that?
Well, I think we've got to have hope. For the period from 2006 until a year ago, there was a deal. It was not fulfilled by Hezbollah in the sense that they moved south of the Litani River, but there was no fighting between Hezbollah and between Israel during that time, and there was no need to evacuate 60,000 Israelis. My hope is that Hezbollah will be pushed north of the Litani River Israel will withdraw, and evacuees will be able to come back to their homes on both sides, 1 million in Lebanon and 60,000 in Israel, and that the Iranians and Hezbollah will have the brains not to try and challenge Israel again the way they did. Hezbollah is there as a deterrent for Iran. It doesn't have to attack Israel the way it did post-October 7. I hope we go back to that, and I hope we can see some peace in that part of the region.
I know how impossibly difficult this issue is to discuss in a civilized fashion, and I want to thank all of you for doing so. Strong passions on all sides, but this was a most illuminating and helpful conversation. My thanks to Einat Wilf, the former member of the Knesset in Israel, Khaled El-Gindi from the Middle East Institute, John Allen from the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the U of T. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In 2020, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya emerged as a powerful voice for change in Belarus when she ran against President Alexander Lukashenko, who had led the country since 1994 with some have called an iron hand. The election results led to the largest protests in the country's history and pressure on Tsikhanouskaya to leave Belarus. As her country continues to face political turmoil and international condemnation for siding with Russia in the war on Ukraine, the fight for democracy remains at the forefront of Tsikhanouskaya's mind, and we welcome her to our studio tonight. It's great to meet you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for coming in here. I don't want to assume that our audience knows a great deal about your country, so we're going to do a little bit of quick history here, just to give people some background, okay? Sheldon, if you would, bring up the graphic, and here we go. Let's go back to 1991. Belarus declares its independence as the Soviet Union breaks up, and Belarusian becomes the official state language. 3 years later, Alexander Lukashenko wins the first presidential election on a campaign of fighting corruption. The next year, 1995, Friendship and Cooperation Pact signed with Russia, and Russian is reinstated as a co-official language. Now, let's move ahead to between 2001 and 2020. Lukashenko is re-elected 5 more times in 2001, 06, 10, 15, and 2020. Opposition and Western observers insist these elections were undemocratic. In 2022, Belarus allows its territory to be used by Russia's army to launch attacks into northern Ukraine as part of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And just one more, let's take a look at a map so that we can see where Belarus is located in Eastern Europe. It is a landlocked country bordered by Russia to the east, Ukraine to the south, Poland to the west, Lithuania and Latvia, 2 of the 3 Baltic countries, to the northwest. Population about 9 million. Minsk is the capital and largest city. Okay, with that background in place, let's go back a few years. It's 2020. Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years. You, at the time, were a stay-at-home mother of 2 children, and you decided to run against him. Why?
First of all, it was my husband who decided to challenge Lukashenko's regime because really Belarusian people were fed up, with his attitude to people, with his dictatorship, with lack of freedom of speech, so on and so forth. He always was like humiliating people. And, my husband became YouTube blogger asking people, how they feel in Belarus. And when he became very popular among population, Lukashenko jailed him. And but before my husband decided to run against him because people asked him to do so. And when he was jailed, my first step to replace him was out of love to my husband, because everything what he was doing was important for me. I wanted to support him. And, of course, I didn't have any political background. I was mother of 2, but I wanted to show him and people that out of love, we have to save our country from dictatorship.
What happened to your husband since then?
So my husband was detained in May 2020, and since then he is in jail. And moreover, since March 2023, for more than 1 year already, he's kept in incommunicado mode. He's political prisoner. I haven't heard about him a word. I don't know if he's alive. So we can't send letters. Lawyer is not allowed to visit him. And, I every day have to answer my children's questions, where is our daddy? When are we going to return home? So it's a tough fight. That you told that I live in other country, in Lithuania at the moment, but we continue our fight. So we want to release Sergei and other thousands of political prisoners that have been detained since 2020.
Your children are 14 and 9.
Yeah.
And they have not seen their father in 4 years?
Yeah.
So you took his place during the election. Lukashenko got 81% of the vote. You got 10% of the vote. How much do you think that reflects the actual popular will of the people of Belarus?
During all the presidential elections, all the elections have been falsified, maybe beside the first one, because in 1994, Lukashenko for sure was elected. But when people saw how he started to transform our country to dictatorship, he dismantled parliament, he dismantled justice system, he changed our symbols, national symbols. The picture of Belarus you showed with these red and green lights, it's Soviet Union style symbols. Before we had different democratic symbols. But Lukashenko was the most pro-Russian person in Belarus, and he always wanted to drag us back to Soviet Union. We as people want to be part of Europe, to return to our family of countries, and he was against this.
Can you go back to Belarus?
No, actually I myself was detained in absentia for 15 years in jail. So of course I will be imprisoned immediately I cross the border.
And you're in Lithuania now?
I live in Lithuania with my children, yeah.
Is it safe for you there?
Since 2020, because of fraudulent elections, because of wave of repressions, at least 500,000 of Belarusians had to flee the country, and no one activist in exile cannot feel safe, because we don't know how long the hands of the regime are. People, of course, we live in democratic world, but we don't know. Recently, one Belarusian was extradited from Vietnam on demand of Belarusian regime, and he's facing death penalty. So it's not always, and actually regime are misusing international institutions like Interpol. They put us in red list. I'm declared as extremist, as terrorist in Belarus, and there are many people like me, and of course we might have problems while traveling, while crossing borders. So it's not easy life in exile. Though of course people who stay in the country, they live in constant fear because of the regime repression. So our task, common task, is to return our country back to people.
We have had many prime ministers, presidents, significant cabinet ministers, famous people in this studio before, but we have never had anybody who had as much security as you. You are traveling with, I don't know how many people are out there. You've got your people, you've got RCMP, I think you've got Ontario Provincial Police as well. Do you need that much security wherever you go?
It's up to the country to decide, how to secure my visit, because of course I'm like enemy of this regime, and something might happen. And I'm grateful to the countries who's taken care of me and who is taking care of all the Belarusians who had to flee the country, because we are like stateless people. Not all of Belarusians want to ask for asylum, but we need, legalization issues just to stay free in the democratic world. So we are grateful to Canada that you're hosting many Belarusians who escaping repressions in Belarus.
Understood. We showed the map earlier that shows a 1,000-kilometer long border between your country and Ukraine.
Yeah.
You have long-standing cultural ties, your two countries. And I wonder how much friction the war between Russia and Ukraine has caused in Belarus.
We have to divide Belarusian regime and Belarusian people. It is Lukashenko, who is so-called, president in Belarus, who allowed Russian missiles to be launched from Belarus. He made our country co-aggressor against the will of Belarusian people. And Belarusian people, despite all repressions in our country, since the very first days of the war, we went to the rallies against the war. Our partisans stopped Russian trains who were bringing weapons to Belarus. Our Belarusian military volunteers are fighting shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians. So our Belarusian refugees helped Ukrainian refugees because we know what it means, to grab your child, to grab one back and leave your country, leaving everything behind. So it's Ukrainian pain is our pain. We have to, I have to explain that Russia, they don't see Belarus or Ukraine as separate independent states. They look at us as naughty children who want to Europe, who want to live democratic life. They want, to return to the Soviet Empire, family. But we are sovereign independent countries, and it's up to people to decide our future. And of course, the victory of Ukraine and fate of Belarus are deeply interconnected. We need Ukrainians to win this war with the help of the democratic world, to give Belarusian people one more opportunity, to dismantle this regime.
You had a meeting with Canada's foreign minister, Melanie Joly, not too long ago. How did that meeting go? What did you discuss?
I met with the minister several times. She's really became friend of Belarusian people, and met with Prime Minister Trudeau also several times. And I see how Canadian government is trying to help Belarusian people, our Belarusian democratic movement in our fight. And I'm so grateful for this because you are so far away. I think that many Canadians even don't know where Belarus is, but the values we are fighting for is the values to cherish so much here in Canada. So what we asking from Canadian government is pressure on Lukashenko's regime to weaken them, sanctions, political isolation. But on the other hand, we need assistance to our civil society, to our media that have been ruined in Belarus and now have to work from exile. We need support to our human rights defenders who are taking care of thousands of political prisoners. So Canadian government supported our media outlet a lot, and we have to fight with the huge propagandistic machine. We need our alternative media to be very strong. So what else we need is voice. And so as Canada is going to be chair in G7 very soon, I asked Minister to give the voice to Belarusian democratic forces, to mention Belarus in final communique of different
And do you think she will?
I think that, yeah. I see really eagerness, to help us to ruin this regime in Belarus.
Let me ask you about, there's two different approaches to getting what you want. On the one hand, if the world isolates, puts sanctions on, makes life difficult for Belarus, that's one approach. The other approach is to engage, to try to negotiate, to try to establish more ties with Belarus. We're clearly taking the first approach, not the second approach. Do you think it's working?
I think that many leaders, democratic leaders, still think that dictators cannot be re-educated. That if you are communicating to them or you appease them, they might be changed. They're not. They will never change. They will challenge democratic world more boldly. They will become more aggressive if democracy will not show its teeth. So I think the best solution in countries like Belarus, where people have full consensus, against the regime, help people to do our job. Because we don't ask countries to interfere or to do our job instead of us. We want to do this ourselves. Dismantle the regime and change country for democracy. But help us. No one war and no one fight cannot be won when you are alone. It's about Belarus. It's about Ukraine. We need allies. We need energy, to continue. And if people think that democracy doesn't care if they don't help our movement, to keep pressure on the regime. So what's the reason to fight for democracy? Democracy is powerful. Democracy has to, but show it. So I think that dictatorship can only be fought. So keep pressure on dictators, help people who are fighting against this dictatorship, and it will be like your contribution into this fight.
All right, let me ask you about political events of the last couple of weeks. Donald Trump has been pretty clear that his days of continually supplying Ukraine with arms to help in its war against Russia, those days are coming to an end. He wants America first. He wants a much more isolationist America. Are you concerned that that will spill over to Belarus and that the support that you want from America, from Canada, from other Western countries won't be there because the West seems to be entrenching more?
So as victory of Ukraine is really critical for Belarus, of course, I'm worried that some assistance to Ukraine can be stopped. But I really believe in democratic society. I really believe that in democratic countries, there's people who are deciding. And I see eagerness of Canadians and American people to help Ukraine to win this war, because people understand that Ukrainians and Belarusians, we are not just fighting for our pieces of land. We are not just defending our countries. We are defending democracy. And democracy is in critical position at the moment. I understand America first, every country can take care only about their land, but then, believe me, dictators and tyrants will knock your doors very soon if you don't stop them at the front line that is in Belarus and Ukraine at the moment. So there cannot be simple answers to difficult questions. If stop providing Ukrainians with necessary weapons for them to defeat, dictators, it will not solve the issue of this resistance between democracy and autocracy. It will only embolden them. We already see how dictators are making alliances. They are learning from each other, and they are crossing red line after red line, challenging the democratic world. And if you don't answer, if you try and to appease them, believe me, it will bring to much worse disaster.
Well, there is a view out there, and I'm not taking a position on this, but there is a view that says that Russia invaded Ukraine because the West was too provocative. The West started making noises about having Ukraine come into NATO. Russia started to feel nervous about what was happening on its border, and therefore that was part of the reason why they invaded. Not to mention decades and decades of history feeling like Ukraine was part of their country anyway. Could you make the same argument about Belarus? If we show too much interest in Belarus, does that provoke Russia even more, and does that provoke Lukashenko even more to keep things the way they are?
I would put the question a little bit different way. It's not the issue that you are paying too much interest to Belarus, is that Belarusian people paying too much interest in the democratic world. This is us who are choosing our future. This is us who want to be part of big democratic, wonderful family. The same about Ukrainians. It's not like NATO who is coming to Ukraine. It's Ukrainian people who are choosing NATO, for example, or Europe. And how dare any other country, to interfere and to conduct? You can do this or you cannot. We are sovereign people, and we have right, to live in the country we choose.
There are elections again in January, right? Are you going to stand as a candidate?
What you call elections in Canada or in any other democratic country has nothing in common with elections in Belarus. We can call it ritual, farce, imitation, or reappointment of Lukashenko by Lukashenko, but not election. Because in the country where alternative media are ruined, where all the civil organizations are liquidated, where thousands of political prisoners, where people live in constant fear, where KGB, and we still have KGB in Belarus, they feel like absolutely impunity. There is no justice system, no observers. So it's imitation. It's not about elections. All political opponents of Lukashenko or in jail or in exile. nobody can become opponent to Lukashenko in elections, because it's total repressions in Belarus. So it's impossible, and of course we as Belarusian people, we don't recognize these so-called elections, and I see full consensus among our democratic allies, our Western allies, that the countries will not recognize Lukashenko again.
So you don't plan to run?
I can't. I live in exile. If I return the country, I will be detained immediately, the same as other, at least 500,000 people who had to flee Belarus. It's impossible. So I think that people in the democratic world don't usually understand that what you call elections is not elections at all.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I take your point.
Absolutely.
You called it a farce.
I can't, and I think not anybody else, can oppose Lukashenko, because in 2020, Lukashenko got such a huge trauma that we lost elections to a woman, he lost elections to Belarusian people, and now it will look like more like military operation rather than elections.
Understand. The greatest hockey player in the history of the world, is from Belarus originally.
Yeah.
Have you met Wayne Gretzky yet?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, his family has Belarusian roots, of course. And I had two great-grandfathers come from Belarus as well.
Oh, really?
Yes, indeed. So there you go.
Look, many prominent people who are working in different countries have Belarusian roots, and we're very proud of this. And for us, it's much easier to talk to people who have some knowledge about Belarus, or who had some great-grandfathers in Belarus, because it's becoming like what's happening in Belarus becoming your pain as well. And for me, as for a politician, is the most difficult is to talk to a person with empty eyes who, doesn't take care about the country, because we need help, we need assistance, we need influence, but if I can't touch the heart of the person, it's difficult to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know this is not the life you plan to have, but this is the life you have, and we wish you well with your quest.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, November 27th, 2024. Tomorrow on the program, author and philosopher Mark Kingwell will be here to tell us why we need to question authority. Coincidentally, the title of his latest book. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.